Okay, hi. This is a video where I'm going to replay a big part of the debate that I recently had with vegan Dr. Avi Bitterman. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background, I regularly challenge the wild claims from vegans on Facebook pages to debate. I don't like doing the debate on the Facebook page or social media page itself because typically you can't follow a train of thought because people jump in left, right, and centre. The person you're debating disappears for hours at a time, sometimes days, and oftentimes they don't debate you anyway. They just post videos and articles from somebody else. So it really doesn't work. So I like to challenge to an actual live debate where none of that can happen. It's very, very rare for a vegan to do that. I don't believe that they have the confidence in their own knowledge, and I really wish they would carry that lack of confidence through into well, maybe let's not change my diet radically to a experimental diet until I know more, but they don't do that. So one thing that they do is that they will pull one of their gurus, and if they happen to be in contact or they know friends with one of the big vegan gurus, they'll say, hey, he'll debate you and he'll rip you apart, and then they'll throw some laughing emojis and typically what have you. So of course I'm not frightened of their big gun vegans. I had a debate with David Rams recently, one of their other influencers. He also was typical vegan. In fact, he had a few tricks, one of which was to mute my mic or lower it down so that he could speak over me and whatever. Anyway, so this particular debate, Avi Bitterman, I was hoping for a slightly more professional debate. Not sure I got it. It did degenerate into him calling me names and getting very frustrated. I'm not going to go into that long into the debate because it was hours and hours and was very painful. I'm just going to cover the first part of the debate, which set the foundation, and he'd already lost the debate by the time we'd got 20-25 minutes in. So there's really not much point in going beyond that. But anyway, so before I get to that, let me just show you who he is. Okay, so this is his YouTube channel. And what you can see is, so it's spelled AVI, but pronounced RV. So RV versus Lauren Southern here, RV versus Alden's number, whatever, vegan doctor versus vaccine skeptic, and so on. So he likes to debate people, RV versus Mike Israel RV versus vegan gains abortion debate, RV versus Steve Kirsch, and so on. So this guy is an influencer. He likes to debate. What's this? 20k views on this one. I don't very often get that many views. So there we go. So that's who he is. So he's a vegan. He's an MD, and he likes to debate. Now, one thing I was hopeful of, at least I'm going to have someone that, you know, when I make certain points, he's going to know that they're true, whereas a lot of vegans will deny them because they don't really know even the basics. And he's going to have a grasp of science. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring it up. I'm going to play the debate, and I'm going to pause it every now and again and make comments to expand on certain points. So are you ready? Let's begin.
Two people talking at once then.
Let's get it.
You don't hold quite the full-on views that some of these vegans that I would normally be talking
with
do.
To the start.
It's an unhealthy choice for a human. But again, the data is limited to make any conclusive claims, I would say.
So, okay. So, all right. So we can discuss. So the issue, so just so I'm clear, the point of contention here is or at least the debate.
Okay. So let me just, because I've just gone in a few minutes, because there's a lot of preamble back and forth. And basically he asked me, what is it that you're trying to debate? What are you disagreeing with? So I laid that out, and he's now qualifying that statement. So you know what the debate's about. So that's where we're going to start.
Debate proposition that you're putting forward is that the current state of the literature is insufficient to claim either superiority, inferiority, or equivalence, or anything in between between vegan diets and non-vegan diets?
Yes, I think we can say that humans have eaten over the course of civilization. They've eaten omnivore diets of various types that included animal products and plants for the most part, although there are cultures that have eaten very little in terms of plant. But we don't have any vegan cultures. So the vegan diet is an experimental diet, whereas the omnivore...
I'm not sure why that makes the vegan diet an experimental diet. I mean,
okay, let's pause right there, because he's going to argue very basic common sense stuff right from the beginning, and he's going to do this all the way through. So I've just explained that the diet of all human civilizations up till now has been either omnivore or carnivore. So either plant and animal, or just animal, one or the other. And that there's been no plant-only cultures ever. He agreed with the fact that there have been no plant-based cultures, but didn't agree with the statement that I made, that made the vegan diet experimental. Well, it's very clearly experimental, since it's a diet that humans haven't eaten in the whole of history till now. And my point that I'm going to argue, you'll see, is that we currently do not have enough data to suggest that the vegan diet is healthy for humans. We don't have that data yet. So therefore, without that data, and the fact that it hasn't been a diet that we've ever had in any culture, civilization in history, that by definition makes it experimental. It seems clear to me, but he's going to argue that point.
it depends. I guess that depends what you mean by experimental. If by experimental you just mean hasn't been around as long, I'll grant you that. Sure, it's true. Vegan diets haven't been around as long. But what makes something experimental or not is not fundamentally determined by how long a diet has been around.
Well, yes, if you haven't had a diet long enough to know that it's healthy, then that makes it experimental. Come on.
It's a proxy. It's a heuristic. It tracks with how experimental something is, but it's not a law. What ultimately makes something experimental or not is the state of the literature on the topic and the types of data that are on the various different types of diets. The other thing to point out is that how long we've evolved eating something, it doesn't health track, at least not for at the ages after 40, or after the reproductive years. In fact, sometimes it tracks with unhealthy outcomes. As, for example, there are various examples of antagonistic pleiotropy. So I would be very cautious of making any extrapolations of it based on evolution or based on our ancestral history, though, or anything like that.
Okay, so hold on. I'm not sure why he moved to a silly voice to say not to use our ancestral history, or be very careful about using it. The only thing I can think of is he knows it's a silly argument, and so therefore the silly voice. But he's just literally said that we've got to be very careful about using data based on our ancestral diet. So all the thousands of years, and some people believe in millions of years and what have you, but whatever the period, the full period of human history have been eating a certain type of diet. And we need to be very careful about using that data to mean anything, right? We've got to ignore that data. I mean, it's unbelievable that he's just said that, but this is a doctor who's supposed to be, science-based, and he has just said that. We've got to be very careful about using the diet of our ancestors. That's dodgy data. That we've got to, really pretty much ignore that. Really? No, I don't think so. I think that's pretty important data.
So when you say experimental, let's clear one at a time. So when you say experimental, do you just mean it's been around not as long, or are you saying that the state of the literature, there's such a paucity, such that eating a vegan diet is experimental in virtue of there just being such a paucity of data?
Well, I think that first of all we have to ask the question: what length of time should a diet be studied before we can conclusively say this is a healthy diet for this particular species, whatever it may be? So that's a good starting point, I guess. So how long do we need to study a diet before we can make those claims? What's your thoughts on that?
I'll just point out that my question that I just asked you has not been answered, right?
No, I was answering your question by asking a question for which the answer of that question would have answered your question. However, I'm polite to him and I don't say that.
So I can answer your question.
Can you? Okay, hold on. Let's be fair. Sorry, maybe I missed your question. So
My question was by experimental. Yeah, my question was by experimental. Do you just mean that the diet has not been around long enough, or are you saying that the literature is there? There's such a paucity of literature such that it is experimental. It's experimental in virtue of there not being enough data.
Okay, so my question was the start of an answer to your question, but let me be more direct, and then we can move on to that I asked, and that is that I don't think we have the data or the length of time. Both of those factors come into play. We can't have the data without the length of time. So
hence my question to him, because if you haven't got sufficient time, you can't have the data. So that was why I asked him how long he felt that needed to be studied for, which he didn't answer.
To my question to make that point, so I'm asking you the question: what period of time do you believe one would need to study or see the effects of a diet before one could conclude conclusively that it was a healthy diet for the species in question?
Yeah. So So again, I don't see how the so just to be clear on your answer, and I'll get to answering your question. Your answer is that there's not enough data. That's what you mean by experimental. Correct?
Okay, let's run with that. Yes.
Okay, so rather than continue this beat around the bush, round and round in circles argument, I just accepted that. But actually, my prime point was time. The data is a result of not having enough time. Anyway, so I accepted that. Let's see what his answer is going to be to a very simple question: how long do we need to study a diet before we can say, when a new diet for a species that's being given, whether we can. How long do we need to study that before we can say that it's a healthy diet? Easy question, simple question. What's he going to say? 5 years, 10 years, 6 generations? I mean, he's got lots of choices here. Is he going to be a politician? I think you'll find he is.
Okay. All right. So, and then you asked me, okay, well, how long does it have to be to conclusively say something? Well, I don't know what you mean by. I'll have to understand what you mean by conclusively, because the way I view my beliefs is always on like some kind of spectrum, on some type of dial. It's not a binary type of thing. I'm not like, this is 100% or this is it's every bit of data shifts my credence.
Right.
I guess I don't know what you mean by conclusively there. Nor do I think
let's tone down the word conclusive. From a scientific point of view, I understand that conclusives are, somewhat challenging. So let's just say that we can be confident.
Yeah. So I think that our credence is going to be indexed to whatever the study is going to cover. So, for example, if this.
Well, we said what the study was going to cover. What we wanted to know was how long do we need to study a diet before we can say that it's a healthy diet for the given species? In other words, a species appropriate diet. How long do we need before we can say that? That's what we're asking, right?
Study is covering a 10-year span for in adulthood. Then indexed to adults, then we could make fairly strong inferences, provided everything else on the study checks out. If the study is indexed to children over a 10-year span in children, then okay, well that doesn't give us a lot of reason to make good credences for adults, but for children it does. And so you would make these type of inferences for index to the nature of the very studies in questions. It would So there's not like one. Go ahead.
So if you're giving 10 years as a period that you feel significant enough to draw.
Well, not even 10. It doesn't have to be 10. I'm just giving an example. Like the point is that.
Hold on. So I asked him, how many years do you need to study a diet before you can conclude that it's a healthy diet for the species? And he gives me 10 years. And then when I pin him down, so okay, so you're saying 10 years, he backtracks immediately and says that's just an example. So he hasn't answered the question.
That typically, like for different interventions, typical follow-ups are around 5 years. By the way, that medicine typically relies on, and sometimes it's even less than that. But on average,
yeah, this isn't a medicine study. This is a study of a diet to see if the diet is a healthy diet for a species. So 5 years isn't going to cut it. But anyway, let's see what else he has to say.
it's around 5 years for certain interventions. Now, there's certain interventions that we might need to extend the time frame for that, depending on what types of outcomes we're looking at. Also,
I told him what the outcome was. The outcome was, is this diet healthy for the human species? That's the outcome we're looking for.
that's another thing. It also depends on what type of outcome we're looking at. Some outcomes you could make very strong inferences in less than 1 year. Some outcomes you need 5 years. Some outcomes you need 10 years, which is fine. But which is why it's very misleading to just say, oh, this is healthy, end of story. Like, you have to look at healthy with respect to what outcome. So,
I don't understand what your problem is. I've just explained in the question what the outcome we were looking for. We're looking to find out if a diet was a species-appropriate diet, whether it's going to be a healthy diet for that species. That's the outcome we're looking for. And you're not going to find that out in 6 months and 5 years and stuff like that. You're just not. But you're not committing to a time frame, are you? Because you're being a politician.
So I want to dial in a lot of the specifics. So to answer your question,
finally. Oh my goodness, finally. To answer your question, great. Listen carefully to what he has to say here. He's about to answer my question.
it depends on the study you're talking about.
Oh no, it depends. We know what the study is. I told you the study. How long do we have to study a diet before we can know if it's a new diet, before we can know if it's a healthy diet for the species we're using it with?
It depends on the characteristics. It depends on the question you're asking. It depends on the outcome you're asking. Some health outcomes, 6 months is good enough.
Hang on. So this is the answer to my question. You just said you were going to answer my question. This isn't an answer to my question. You're not addressing the question at all. You're beating around the bush saying, well, it depends. It depends what you're asking. It depends what the outcomes are. It depends what the studies are. I told you what the study was and what we needed to know. And you haven't given an answer. Politician.
Some health outcomes you need several years. Some health outcomes you need 5 years. Some health outcomes you may need longer than that.
Okay, so maybe the question that we should be asking first of all is...
So I'm changing track because this isn't working. He's just not going to answer the question.
What is the purpose of a healthy diet?
Yeah, I think the purpose of a healthy diet is there are certain things that you minimally want from a diet, and then there are certain additional things you want.
Okay, remember the context. The context here is is the vegan diet a healthy diet for the human species? Okay, so what is it that you're looking for from the diet? And here's his answer, which he misses the most important thing, which doesn't surprise me, and I expected it, but he does it.
So typically, at least for me, what I would want, the bare minimums are going to be sufficient calories to live off of. You're going to need sufficient. You're going to need sufficient micronutrients to live off of. You're going to need, and then the other things above and beyond that, the bare minimums, are going to be things like, all-cause mortality. So over a given time, how likely am I to die in this diet versus another diet? I'd want to living life into elderly ages is something I'd want. I don't want to die early. I would want to also have a comparatively lower rate of cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, strokes. Assuming strokes being attributable to a diet and not some other thing, cancer.
Okay, he's just going to give a big list of all the things he doesn't want to get while he's on this diet. So I'm trying to hurry him up, and I'm basically trying to sum it up in one word. So in other words, healthy. So he's already mentioned long life to old age, and now he's talking about healthy. Okay, we can do that in 2 words: longevity and health. 2 words, but he never does 2 words when he can use 100.
Health can cover umbrella term that covers all of that, right? So you want to be healthy.
And by health, and by health, the reason I'm atomizing it is just because sometimes they're discordant. Sometimes a given intervention can decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease, but increase your risk of something else. And well, so
but that, by using the term healthy, we cover all of that, because if you decrease a particular
we can subsume it. We can subsume it.
Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah.
So I feel that you've missed the most important factor that we're looking for from a diet. Actually, from all of that, although everything you've said is true and important, I think that the point of a diet must include the ability to survive as a species. Therefore, reproduction of healthy offspring that can reproduce healthy offspring has to be part of that.
Oh, sure. I mean,
oh, yeah, of course. Reproduction. Yeah, that's. I guess that's quite important. How the context is the diet for a species, and he hadn't thought about the species survival or reproducing. Somehow he missed that. There's a reason he missed that, because it doesn't look good for vegans when we start getting into that. But anyway.
You would want to survive as a species, sure, and you'd want to be able to have children. Okay, yeah, no, I agree with that.
Okay, so can we also agree that diet impacts the health of our children? The mother's diet, well, also the father's diet, will have an effect on their offspring.
Yeah, it can in certain cases, sure. In certain cases it doesn't, in certain cases it does.
Yeah, so it can have an effect.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
yeah,
so
I agree.
Typically we'd probably agree that a healthier parents.
Okay, so this is important right here, because this is a pivotal moment in the debate. So he's just agreed that the diet or the health of the parents, which the diet plays a major role in, the health of the parents has an impact on the health of their offspring. So diet of the parent has an effect on the health of the offspring. Now he's a bit wobbly on it, because sometimes you get more wobbly, but he's admitted that. That's very important, because I'm gonna use this as a foundation that he's not gonna like. So just see where this is going. So he's admitted that already.
Would result in healthier offspring.
So I just said healthier. So on average, healthier parents is going to, on average, result in healthier offspring. That's what I've said.
Not necessarily. Okay, so this is where the not necessarily. Typically,
no worries. Let that go. No worries. Let that go.
Typically, yeah. There are certain it's a heuristic. There are certain cases where you actually may be making your baby. By you being healthier, your baby might be less healthy, and the way to make your baby healthier is actually to take a hit.
Right. So I'm not going to argue about this, but it's just, again, well-known science and common sense that on average, healthier parents are going to have healthier children. I mean, and he's quibbling on that, and I know why he's quibbling on it, because he doesn't like where it's going. But anyway, he more or less agrees with it in general. So I get where I want to go on this.
Yourself, but typically, sure, I could agree with the heuristic.
Okay. So it being the case that we can both agree that diet impacts offspring, then looking at any diet's effectiveness has to include a multi-generational period of time to see what happens to offspring.
No, I don't agree with.
Okay, so here's his first major departure from all common sense and logic. So he's agreed that the vegan diet is a new diet. We don't have a lot of data on. He's agreed that any diet can have an impact on offspring, children. Okay, so the healthier parent is more likely, he even agreed that typically is going to have healthier offspring, and the diet can have an impact. So therefore, logically, if diet can have an impact on the offspring, and you're trying to study to see if a diet is healthy for a species, you need to know its effect on the offspring. We've agreed it can affect them, and the only way of knowing the effect on the offspring is to have a sufficient period of time where the parents have a diet and they have children, and the children then have that diet and they have children, and we have some multi-generations, and we can look at the children and see how healthy, strong, fertile, how long they lived, all these things. Right? That's the only way of knowing that. You can't do 5-year study and then predict that from well, you can make a prediction, but whether or not the prediction is correct is entirely another matter. But he's just disagreed with that. Well, we don't need to do it over multi-generations. Unbelievable.
Okay, so we agree.
Well, when you say, well, wait, let me just get clarity. When you say multi-generational period of time, do you mean like it has to be like 30 years or something to like encapsulate like, the life of someone going.
I don't know why the guy can't get words out, but his brain seems scrambled because he's scrambling around trying to find some way out of the trap that he's in, based on pushing him into a logical position that he can't use logic to get out of. He's going to have to use some other method than logic, because logic's not going to help him.
From point A to point, from some early point to maturity to having children and then looking at the outcomes there. Like, is that what you mean by multi-generational?
I would go much further than that. 30 years is nowhere near long enough. I would say that.
Okay, so then we'll disagree. Yes, I think that we can make inferences, and so I think we can make inferences. We can make strong inferences without doing that. There are ways of taking multiple.
He's going to keep going on and on about inferences. In other words, we're going to look at some little piece of data and we're going to extrapolate that and draw some conclusions, which may or may not be true, and call that science.
Multiple different studies that cover different time points, and saying, okay, well, the reason we can make certain inferences is because even though ideally it would be better if we had just like, a 60-year study, a 7-year study.
Well, at least he admits it would be better if you actually had time.
We can scale it out. At the end of the day, there are different hypotheses, and they would expect different things even on.
Hypotheses, well done, exactly correct. Hypotheses, is that science? Certainly not science we can trust. Hypotheses are a part of science. We need hypotheses, and then we need to go and test them, right? How do we test them? We need the data.
Smaller timescales, and they would expect different things at different probabilities, and so you still can make inference. It's not like, well, you can't make an inference because the data wasn't 60 years.
No, you can make an inference, you just can't trust it. That's not science. You can make as many inferences as you want. You can make as many predictions as you want. You can extrapolate data all day long. But don't trust your life on the inference that you've made. Certainly not the whole of the human species. No.
Even if it's much less than that, you can make an inference, and that just follows from Bayes' theorem.
Right. But you understand that inferences can be wrong and are wrong. You mentioned earlier, for example.
Of course I do. That's not the point.
Great. Of course you do. You understand that. Right. Inferences can be wrong. All your argument's going to be now is on what percentage of terms that they're wrong. And it's not the same as actual proper science, is it? Where you've actually got the data that you can observe and repeat and see cause and effect. I don't know. This is a doctor.
Point.
Well, okay, but so what I'm saying is, until you have the data, you're going to the full data, which would be, as I say, multi-generational data, where you see that this diet is being eaten by and they've lived to this age, and then they've had children that have gone on to be vibrant and healthy that lived at this age, and we can look over multiple generations. Then we're having to use inference. We're having to
of course, we're going to use inference even if we had that data. We'll be using inferences regardless. The strength of the inference will be different, but whether
okay, fair comment. But I would say they're large inferences when we have such little data. And these same inferences are used. Now, you mentioned the 5-year periods and various other periods that are used in medicine. And if we look at medicine, we see, right now we've got a particular medicine has been mandated that has very limited data. We're being told, and I'm being careful of my words here.
Okay, we're not going to get we're not going to get off track, because this is as much as
this is on track. This is spot on track, because you raised this as a point where we're taking data and we're making inferences, and what we're finding is And we can look at many drugs where they've done this, and they've studied it for a short period, made inferences, and then that drug has turned out to be incredibly damaging. I think you'd agree.
That can happen. It
can happen, and it happens a lot. It's happening right now with what I'm just talking about on the video. They made inferences, they told us safe and effective. It's neither. We've got to be very, very careful with inferences. Now, it might not be, if it's a study where you're not going to change your life over it, maybe it's less important. But when we're talking about changing an entire diet for the human population, which is what the vegan agenda is about, the UN, for example, have said that we need to move humans to a vegan diet. This is not just a small little movement. This is an attempt to change the diet of humans. And if we're going to do that, we need to have the data for sure.
I will tell you that the fact that it can happen doesn't mean it's common. In fact, most drugs that have been studied for 5 years, they don't end up like that. There are some examples that are contentious. There are some examples that are not contentious. However, it's a short list compared to the list of total drugs that have done this.
I would disagree.
Okay, well then you'd be but then you'd be wrong, and we can.
Then I would be wrong. He does this all the time. I don't know what to say about this guy.
You can get into that if you'd like. No, you will.
Okay, so I'm wrong. So let's take an example then.
No. But showing me examples isn't going to get you where you want to go here. Because remember, like the claim is that there. Remember, my position acknowledges.
See, the vegan brain is all over the place. You can hear all the time. He's like, that's his whole stuttering and going in circles. And this is the vegan brain for you. It happens all the time with these people.
Acknowledges these examples.
The example I'm going to give is a massive example of very common, continually used over and over again, all different ones, massive brains that are all damaging. But
again, it depends what you mean. We have to specify it down, but
it depends what I mean. In other words, you don't know because I haven't said it yet, but you're still trying to prejudge it. Not clever.
The point I'm making, and this really shouldn't be, this shouldn't be something you're contesting, is just that look, every drug is going to have some risk to it. Sometimes there are drugs where, on the basis of not doing enough data, it turns out there were unforeseen risks that we haven't seen before, and those risks turned out to be massive, and quite substantial.
Well, doctors are the third leading cause of death, and it's via their drugs mostly. So pretty substantial, I would say. And that's the drugs that he's not including in this doing damage thought process.
Now, my contention is that
thalidomide being a very big, well-known example.
I'm aware that there are examples.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm agreeing with you. We're not disagreeing on this point.
Yeah. So, but the contention here is that of the total number of drugs that have been studied for 5 years or so, unforeseeable, especially if they're. So of the total number, the unforeseeable, substantial, major impacting, overturning type of adverse events that have gone to take drugs off the market and stuff, those type of things happen rarely in proportion.
Yeah, that's true what he's just said. I didn't want to get into debate on this because the ones that have substantial devastating effects in a short space of time, like thalidomide, they're rare. But many of the drugs that are passed have much longer term, slower damage, and they're all damaging people. And I think that the damage is much greater than he's saying. But again, I didn't want to get bogged down into this whole thing.
Proportion to the total number of drugs that have been studied for that.
I would agree with that. However, However, my point would be that there are many drugs. For example, I would say all vaccines do more harm than good. All of them.
Okay. Well, we're going to disagree. We're going to disagree with that, but that's not the topic of it. We can have that.
Okay. All right. So you would disagree on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the ultimate point. Here's the ultimate thing that I want to know, actually, because if your standard, because we have different standards, and now there's two routes I can go here. I can, try to boil it down from first principles in terms of the type of inferences you can make. Like, we could reduce it to Bayes' theorem and we can show, like, okay, you have this intuition that you need this long of data. Actually, it turns out that you're just mathematically wrong. We could go that route, or we could do a consistency check, which is to say that, we can ask this question of omnivore diets. Now, omnivore diets have existed longer than vegan diets.
Mhm.
However, there's a great paucity of data. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there's a great limitation for these various health outcomes for omnivore diets.
So now, because he's realizing that he's got no data, and like that, my argument is that he's got no data. He's now having to switch to try and argue that the diet that all humans have eaten, that he agreed with at the beginning, i.e. omnivore stroke carnivore diet, that diet, we don't have enough data. Also, it's kind of similar. The omnivore vegan diet, the omnivore carnivore diet, we don't hardly know anything about either. They're all in the same boat. The vegan diet, the omnivore diet, same basic thing. We don't know enough about either. Now is his claim. Unbelievable.
And in terms of those studies, if you look at the type of data, especially,
I think what we can conclude from the data that we know is that human civilizations throughout known history, as far as we have records, have all eaten some version of an omnivore diet. Obviously, there's some of them have been more plant-based.
Well, I agree with that.
Some of them less.
That's not addressing the question.
Well, let me make my point. Let me make my point.
Yep.
So that's the diet that all human civilizations have eaten throughout known history, and humans have thrived during.
Well, I don't. Well, when you say thrived.
Oh boy! So now we've got to define thrived. He's going to go on and on about thrive now. So by thrived, we've got like, I don't know how many people, 8 billion, 9, I don't believe the numbers that they give us. We've got a lot of people on the planet, and we got here on that diet. We've done okay.
That's going to be, when you say thrive, do you just mean have persisted? Or do you mean the type of thing the goal that I have, which is to live a healthy life to old age, to reduce my risk of.
So again, he keeps going back to, so persist means reproduce. He doesn't want to get on the reproduce. As he's calling persist, the reproduction part of the diet, which is like the most important part of the diet. Some species reproduce and immediately die. The male immediately dies. It's like done its job. Reproduction is pretty important for a species. But he wants to focus on health and longevity. And those are important. We all want them, of course. But we've got to survive first. Anyway.
Cardiovascular disease, cancer, and yes, I will include having offspring, but are you just talking about persisting? When you say thrive, what do you mean?
Well, the first point in doing well as a species is that you reproduce effectively. We have people who are claiming that we have too many people in the world. The population is too great.
I'm not interested. Look, I just want to know what you mean when you say.
Well, there are different factors that we can look at, but one of them is the ability to increase your population. Now, you're talking about health. Health that actually includes health, because if you haven't got a healthy population, you're not going to reproduce effectively in the first place. So I'm looking at the fact that humans.
Look. When you say thrive, do you just mean persist? Now, if you're going on reproduction, that's part of persistence, right?
Reproduction is also part of health. You seem to be missing that point.
Okay, persistence. Yes. Okay, I agree, because that's okay. So you don't have to waste time rambling about reproduction, because I've already.
How rude! Waste time rambling about reproduction. You're the guy that keeps on bringing it back to persistence, which is what reproduction, not me.
Given that to you. So what I'm asking you is, when you say thrive, do you just mean persist, or do you mean something more than that? Is there something
persistence is the first priority, because if you're not doing that, then nothing else really matters. But I would agree with you that health then, so the quality of each individual life also has to come into play. I agree with that, and so that's what you're talking more about, which is in part you've mentioned a few times.
Lifespan of living a
Lifespan. I'm gonna slap him in a minute with the lifespan thing. Just wait.
healthy life to old age is my main goal.
Yeah, okay. So we've got two components, so that we're both agreeing on the persistence. So then we can, and certainly the omnivore diet has achieved that. Okay, so now we can talk about health in terms of, so the quality of that life and the length of that life. Those are fair things. Let me ask you a question. What's the average age of death of a vegan?
Oh dear, that's a question that vegans don't like. What's the average age of death? When you're a vegan that's going on about lifespan, and you want to ignore persistence, reproduction, and all that, you want to just focus on health and lifespan, those two things. And I just ask you, one of the two things that you're saying is the big deal. You better have a good answer. You better have a really good answer, and you better be able to say that vegans live 10, 15 years longer, or something incredible, or at least a little bit longer. You better have a good, clear answer.
I'm not sure.
What? I'm not sure. Didn't you just give that as one of your two prime things, that you've got to have a diet that gives you this lifespan? And now I ask you the simple question, well, what's the lifespan of a vegan then? And you're not sure?
It's probably around. I mean, I can look. It probably depends on where the vegan's coming from. It depends on. I mean, it'll depend on a lot of various factors. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Well, I can tell you that the data is not available, because we haven't even had one generation of vegans yet. So that data is not there.
Okay. So if the question is the average lifespan of a vegan from birth.
Now, of course, that was the question. Are you telling me you didn't understand that? You thought I meant, what's the average life of someone who's been an omnivore or carnivore for 30 years, and the last little bit of their life they've been a vegan? That's not the average life of a vegan. That's someone who's had a mixed diet. That's a ridiculous argument. So now you're pretending you've just understood. Oh, you mean a vegan from birth? Of course, from birth. Yes. What's the average age of a vegan from birth till the time they die? And you couldn't answer it. And you couldn't answer it because we don't have that information, because there aren't any vegans who've been born vegans. There's not, that have lived into an old age of 80 and 90. They don't exist, or 100 even. Don't exist.
No, then we don't have that data available. I just don't think we. Again,
because he's in trouble, and he knows he's in trouble. The central tenet is he wants to ignore reproduction. He wants to pretend we don't need to look at the kids of the people on this diet, and he wants to focus on these other areas of health and longevity. And now I've hit him with a central question on longevity, and he's umming and ahhing and can't answer it, pretending he didn't really understand the question. And then when he does finally have to accept, okay, now I've got the question, and yeah, I can't answer it still because we don't have the data. He's lost the debate. Debate's done.
The question that's going to be a paucity of data for omnivores too, because depending on how you define duration of diet. Because
he's now trying to attack the data on the omnivore diet because he's lost the case with the vegan diet, so he now wants to pretend that there's no real data on the omnivore diet either. Unbelievable.
Even
the only reason I raised that.
Let me finish. The issue is going to be is that yes, people, while it is the case that people have subsisted on omnivorous diets, they've done so through varying different degrees of time, and they have changed diets to varying different degrees of time. People generally ate what they could eat, and I don't think anyone, and there are different times where people may have just subsisted through vegetables through a period of time, or plant or fruit through a period of time, and then gone back to eating meat. We don't know. We don't know that.
Yeah, but the point is, what we know.
No, but wait.
Okay, go on.
The point here is that if your goal is to make a case that, well, we've had data where omnivory has where omnivory has persisted, has been shown to make subsistence happen, and the reason we can't say that for vegan is because we don't have a full generational pure diet study. That's going to apply to omnivores too. We don't have any pure generational omnivore diets that that persisted and have consistently, continuously have eaten an omnivore diet, and that we verify.
Have plenty of data. Plenty.
You see, he's right that we don't have a clinical study. We don't, but we have historical data, is the point. We have masses of historical data of what people ate and what ages that they lived to and all of this. So it's not a clinical study. Yeah, if we're going to compare clinical study, yeah, we don't have a clinical study. We don't need a clinical study. We've got thousands and thousands of years of historical data on the diets that different cultures have eaten, and we know a lot about their life. We know a lot about disease and vitality and all of these things. So that data is plentiful on the omnivore / carnivore diet and non-existent on the vegan diet.
Plenty of data.
So we verified that they haven't gone through any long periods of time just eating vegetables. They haven't gone through any long periods of time just eating meat. They've just maintained an omnivore diet. We have that?
So that's his argument now then, that we don't know whether cultures in the past, maybe the Aztecs, maybe all the various different cultures who ate an omnivore diet, maybe for a period of some years, they all just ate plants and didn't eat any animal foods. We don't know that. So give me a break. Give me a break. In a clinical study, it would obviously be a whole different matter. We're not talking about a clinical study here. We're talking about historical evidence and information on diet. And we know that they ate omnivore diets, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's very likely that there were some cultures at some times that you couldn't get certain foods. Maybe they ate just plants for a little while. Although it's hard to imagine what would happen to all the animals. It's more likely that they'd eat animals rather than plants. You can see, sometimes through bad weather, the crops don't grow, but the animals in nearly all environments are usually they're there. So that's how far he has to now sink. He's now sunk to trying to claim that we don't have the data on the diet, which he admitted all civilizations have eaten up until now at the beginning. So we have plenty of historical data on what diets different cultures ate. We know all sorts of information about lifespan and health and all the rest of it. It's not in question that the omnivore / carnivore diet, one or combination of either or, is the diet which humans have arrived at this point. So that's just a fact that he acknowledged right at the beginning of this debate, and now he's having to argue it because he's had to acknowledge that he has no data for the vegan diet that supports it being a diet that will give a fertile, healthy, long life to successive generations. We don't know that. We have to use short-spaced studies and then make inferences from that, which is fine. That's the beginnings of how we start to learn something. But until you get to the end, when you've got the actual full data, you can only make guesstimates, estimates, predictions based upon if this and if that. We can't know. So the vegan diet cannot be said to be healthier than an omnivore / carnivore diet because we don't have the data, contrary to what Dr. Avi Bitterman says. We have plenty of data, not clinical trials. We didn't even have clinical trials thousands of years ago, but we have plenty of historical data to do with diet and health and so on. And that's what we can safely use to be confident in saying that you can eat a carnivore diet as a human being and thrive. You can eat an omnivore diet as a human being and thrive. The vegan diet is experimental precisely because we do not have that information. It's new. We don't have a single generation. We cannot even say, as we saw there, how long does the average vegan live? Can't even say that. So it's still an experiment then, because he cannot say that vegans live longer. Okay, he can't. There's so little data. There's so little that can be claimed for vegans, and even the studies that apparently show that vegans get a little bit less of certain diseases than people that have the standard American diet, a horrific diet. They're usually comparing them to that. Those diets are all correlation diets, which don't take into account all kinds of factors, such as it may well be that the average vegan is more health conscious than the average American eating an SAD diet. Maybe that the average vegan drinks less, smokes less, goes to bed at an earlier time. Who knows all the other cofactors that come into play? And most of those studies show very little, tiny differences. And I think that's a loss. Even over the short term, the vegan diet doesn't do that well compared to the standard American diet. That's not a good endorsement at all. So anyway, I'm gonna close it there. I think you can see the kind of direction it's going and the kind of struggling that he's trying to deal with anything. How he's answering in politicianese continually. How he's honing down on words, or what do you mean by that word? I don't know. And he's rambling and going around in circles. He's umming and ahhing constantly, repeating himself. And later on, he gets into the name calling. And all of that, which is standard for vegans to do as well. So there you have it. Big gun influencer trying to defend or trying to present the case for a vegan diet being as healthy or healthier than the diet that all human civilizations have eaten since the beginning of recorded history. And in my opinion, he's not done a very good job of it. But let me know what you think. What do you think, guys?